Brother Odd by Dean Koontz, Chapter 1. Embraced by stone, steeped in silence, I sat at the high window as the third day of the week surrendered to the fourth. The river of night rolled on, indifferent to the calendar. I hoped to witness that magical moment when the snow began to fall in earnest. Earlier, the sky had shed a few flakes, then nothing more. The pending storm would not be rushed. The room was illuminated only by a fat candle and an amber glass on the corner desk. Each time a draught found the flame, melting light buttered the limestone walls and waves of fluid shadows oiled the corners. Most nights I find lamplight too bright, and when I'm writing, the only glow is the computer screen dialed down to gray text on a navy blue field. Without a silvering of light, the window did not reflect my face. I had a clear view of the night beyond the panes. Living in a monastery, even as a guest rather than as a monk, you have more opportunities than you might have elsewhere to see the world as it is instead of through the shadow that you cast upon it. St. Bartholomew's Abbey was surrounded by the vastness of the Sierra Nevada on the California side of the border. The primeval forests that clothed the rising slopes were themselves cloaked in darkness. From this third-floor window, I could see only part of the deep front yard and the blacktop lane that cleaved it. 4 low lampposts with bell-shaped caps focused light in round, pale pools. The guest house is in the northwest wing of the Abbey. The ground floor features parlors. Private rooms occupy the higher and the highest floors. As I watched in anticipation of the storm, a whiteness that was not snow drifted across the yard, out of darkness into lamplight. The Abbey has one dog, a 110-pound German Shepherd mix, perhaps part Labrador Retriever. He is entirely white and moves with the grace of fog. His name is Boo. My name is Odd Thomas. My dysfunctional parents claim a mistake was made on the birth certificate, that Todd was the wanted name. Yet they had never called me Todd. In 21 years, I have not considered changing to Todd. The bizarre course of my life suggests that Odd is more suited to me, whether it was conferred by my parents with intention or by fate. Below, Boo stopped in the middle of the pavement and gazed along the lane as it dwindled and descended into darkness. Mountains are not entirely slopes. Sometimes the rising land takes a rest. The Abbey stands on a high meadow facing north. Judging by his pricked ears and lifted head, Boo perceived a visitor approaching. He held his tail low. I could not discern the state of his hackles, but his tense posture suggested that they were raised. From dusk, the driveway lamps burn until dawn ascends. The monks of St. Bart's believe that night visitors, no matter how seldom they come, must be welcomed with light. The dog stood motionless for a while, then shifted his attention toward the lawn to the right of the blacktop, his head lowered, his ears flattened against his skull. For a moment I could not see the cause of Boo's alarm. Then, into view came a shape as elusive as a night shadow floating across black water. The figure passed near enough to one of the lampposts to be briefly revealed. Even in daylight, this was a visitor of whom only the dog and I could have been aware. I see dead people, spirits of the departed, who, each for his own reason, will not move on from this world. Some are drawn to me for justice if they were murdered, or for comfort, or for companionship. Others seek me out for motives that I cannot always understand. This complicates my life. I'm not asking for your sympathy. We all have our problems, and yours seem as important to you as mine seem to me. Perhaps you have a 90-minute commute every morning on freeways clogged with traffic, your progress hampered by impatient and incompetent motorists, some of them angry specimens with middle fingers muscular from frequent use. Imagine, however, how much more stressful your morning might be if in the passenger seat was a young man with a ghastly axe wound in his head, and if in the back seat an elderly woman, strangled by her husband, sat pop-eyed and purple-faced. The dead don't talk, I don't know why, and an axe-chopped spirit will not bleed on your upholstery. Nevertheless, an entourage of the recently dead is disconcerting and generally not conducive to an upbeat mood. The visitor on the lawn was not an ordinary ghost, maybe not a ghost at all. In addition to the lingering spirits of the dead, I see one other kind of supernatural entity. I call them Bodaks. They are ink-black, fluid in shape, with no more substance than shadows. Soundless, as big as an average man, they frequently slink like cats slow to the ground. The one on the Abbey lawn moved upright, black and featureless, yet suggested of something half man, half wolf, sleek, sinuous, and sinister. The grass was not disturbed by its passage. Had it been crossing water, it would not have left a single ripple in its wake. In the folklore of the British Isles, a bodock is a vile beast who slithers down chimneys at night and carries off children who misbehave. Rather like inland revenue agents. What I see are neither bodocks nor tax collectors. They carry away neither misbehaving children nor adult miscreants, but I have seen them enter houses by chimneys, by keyholes, chinks, and window frames, as protean as smoke, and I have no better name for them. Their infrequent appearance is always reason for alarm. These creatures seem to be spiritual vampires with knowledge of the future. They are drawn to places where violence or fiery catastrophe is destined to erupt, as if they feed on human suffering. Although he was a brave dog with good reason to be brave, Boo shrank from the passing apparition, his black lips peeled back from his white fangs. The phantom paused as if to taunt the dog. Bodocks seemed to know that some animals can see them. I don't think they know that I can see them too. If they did know, I believe that they would show me less mercy than mad mullahs show their victims when in a mood to behead and dismember. At the sight of this one, my first impulse was to shrink from the window and seek communion with the dust bunnies under my bed. My second impulse was to pee. Resisting both cowardice and the call of the bladder, I raced from my quarters into the hallway. The third floor of the guest house offers 2 small suites. The other currently had no occupant. On the second floor, the glowering Russian was no doubt scowling in his sleep. The solid construction of the Abbey would not translate my footfalls into his dreams. The guest house has an enclosed spiral staircase, stone walls, encircling granite steps. The treads alternate between black and white, making me think of harlequins and piano keys, and of a treacly old song by Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder. Although stone stairs are unforgiving and the black and white pattern can be disorienting, I plunged toward the ground floor, risking damage to the granite if I fell and struck it with my head. 16 months ago, I lost what was most precious to me and found my world in ruins. Nevertheless, I'm not usually reckless. I have less to live for than I once did, but my life still has purpose, and I struggle to find meaning in the days. Leaving the stairs in the condition that I found them, I hurried across the main parlor, where only a night lamp with a beaded shade relieved the gloom. I pushed through a heavy oak door with a stained glass window and saw my breath plumed before me in the winter night. The guest house cloister surrounds a courtyard with a reflecting pool and a white marble statue of St. Bartholomew. He is arguably the least known of the 12 apostles. Here depicted, a solemn St. Bartholomew stands with his right hand over his heart, left arm extended. In his upturned palm is what appears to be a pumpkin, but might be a related variety of squash. The symbolic meaning of the squash eludes me. At this time of year, the pool was drained, and no scent of wet limestone rose from it as in warmer days. I detected instead the faintest smell of ozone, as after lightning and a spring rain, and wondered about it, but kept moving. I followed the colonnade to the door of the guest house receiving room, went inside, crossed that shadowy chamber, and returned to the December night through the front door of the Abbey. Our white shepherd mix, Boo, standing on the driveway as I had last seen him from my third-floor window, turned his head to look at me as I descended the broad front steps. His stare was clear and blue, with none of the eerie eye-shine common to animals at night. Without benefit of stars or moon, most of the expansive yard receded into murk. If a bodock lurked out there, I could not see it. "Boo, where's it gone?" I whispered. He didn't answer. My life is strange, but not so strange that it includes talking canines. With wary purpose, however, the dog moved off the driveway onto the yard. He headed east past the formidable Abbey, which appears almost to have been carved from a single great mass of rock, so tight are the mortar joints between its stones. No wind ruffled the night, and darkness hung with folded wings. Seared brown by winter, the trampled grass crunched underfoot. Boo moved with far greater stealth than I could manage. Feeling watched, I looked up at the windows, but I didn't see anyone. No light other than the faint flicker of the candle in my quarters. No pale face peering through a dark pane. I had rushed out of the guest wing wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt. December dropped its teeth on my bare arms. We proceeded eastward alongside the church, which is part of the abbey, not a separate building. A sanctuary lamp glows perpetually, but it isn't sufficient to fire the colorful stained glass. Through window after window, that dim light seemed to watch us as though it were the single sullen eye of something in a bloody mood. Having led me to the northeast corner of the building, Boo turned south, past the back of the church. We continued to the wing of the abbey that, on the first floor, contains the novitiate. Not yet having taken their vows, the novices slept here. Of the 5 who were currently taking instruction, I liked and trusted 4. Suddenly, Boo abandoned his cautious pace. He ran due east, away from the abbey, and I pursued him. As the yard relented to the untamed meadow, grass lashed my knees. Soon the first heavy snow would compact these tall, dry blades. For a few hundred feet the land sloped gently before leveling off, whereupon the knee-high grass became a mown lawn again. Before us in the gloom rose St. Bartholomew's School. In part the word school is a euphemism. These students are unwanted elsewhere, and the school is also their home, perhaps the only one that some of them will ever have. This is the original abbey, internally remodeled, but still an impressive pile of stone. The structure also houses a convent in which reside the nuns who teach the students and care for them. Behind the former abbey, the forest bristled against the storm-ready sky, black boughs sheltering blind pathways that led far into the lonely dark. Evidently tracking the bodock, the dog went up the broad steps to the front door of the school and through. Few doors in the abbey are ever locked, but for the protection of the students, the school is routinely secured. Only the abbot, the Mother Superior, and I possess a universal key that allows admittance everywhere. No guest before me has been entrusted with such access. I take no pride in their trust. It is a burden. In my pocket, the simple key sometimes feels like an iron fate drawn to a lodestone deep in the earth. The key allows me quickly to seek Brother Constantine, the dead monk, when he manifests with the ringing of bells in one of the towers, or some other kind of cacophony elsewhere. In Pico Mundo, the desert town in which I had lived for most of my time on earth, the spirits of many men and women linger. But here we have just Brother Constantine, who is no less disturbing than all of Pico Mundo's dead combined. One ghost, but one too many. With the bodock on the prowl, Brother Constantine was the least of my worries. Shivering, I used my key and hinges squeaked, and I followed the dog into the school. 2 night lights staved off total gloom in the reception lounge. Multiple arrangements of sofas and armchairs suggested a hotel lobby. I hurried past the unmanned information desk and went through a swinging door into a corridor lighted by an emergency lamp and red exit signs. On this ground floor were the classrooms, the rehabilitation clinic, the infirmary, the kitchen, and the communal dining room. Those sisters with a culinary gift were not yet preparing breakfast. Silence ruled these spaces as it would for hours yet. I climbed the south stairs and found Boo waiting for me on the second-floor landing. He remained in a solemn mood. His tail did not wag, and he did not grin in greeting. 2 long and 2 short hallways formed a rectangle serving the student quarters. The residents roomed in pairs. At the southeast and northwest junctions of the corridors were nurses' stations, both of which I could see when I came out of the stairs in the southwest corner of the building. At the northwest station, a nun sat at the counter reading. From this distance, I could not identify her. Besides, her face was half concealed by a wimple. These are not modern nuns who dress like meter maids. These sisters wear old-style habits and can make them seem as formidable as warriors in armor. The southeast station was deserted. The nun on duty must have been making her rounds or tending to one of her charges. When Boo padded away to the right, heading southeast, I followed without calling to the reading nun. By the time that I had taken 3 steps, she was out of my line of sight. Many of the sisters have nursing degrees, but they strive to make the second floor feel more like a cozy dormitory than like a hospital. With Christmas 20 days away, the halls were hung with garlands of fake evergreen boughs and festooned with genuine tinsel. In respect of the sleeping students, the lights had been dimmed. The tinsel glimmered only here and there, and mostly darkled into tremulous shadows. The doors of some student rooms were closed, others ajar. They featured not just numbers, but also names. Halfway between the stairwell and the nurse's station, Boo paused at room 32, where the door was not fully closed. On block-letter plaques were the names Anna Marie and Justine. This time I was close enough to Boo to see that indeed his hackles were raised. The dog passed inside, but propriety made me hesitate. I ought to have asked a nun to accompany me into these students' quarters, but I wanted to avoid having to explain Bodaks to her. More important, I didn't want to risk being overheard by one of those malevolent spirits as I was talking about them. Officially, only one person at the Abbey and one at the convent know about my gift, if in fact it is a gift rather than a curse. Sister Angela, the Mother Superior, shares my secret, as does Father Bernard the Abbot. Courtesy had required that they fully understand the troubled young man whom they would be welcoming as a long-term guest. To assure Sister Angela and Abbot Bernard that I was neither a fraud nor a fool, Wyatt Porter, the chief of police in Pico Mundo, my hometown, shared with them the details of some murder cases with which I had assisted him. Likewise, Father Sean Llewellyn vouched for me. He is a Catholic priest in Pico Mundo. Father Llewellyn is also the uncle of Stormy Llewellyn, whom I had loved and lost, whom I will forever cherish. During the 7 months I lived in this mountain retreat, I had shared the truth of my life with one other, Brother Knuckles, a monk. His real name is Salvatore, but we call him Knuckles more often than not. Brother Knuckles would not have hesitated on the threshold of room 32. He is a monk of action. In an instant he would have decided that the threat posed by the Bodak trumped propriety. He would have rushed to the door as boldly as did the dog, although with less grace and with a lot more noise. I pushed the door open wider and went inside. In the 2 hospital beds lay Anna Marie, closest to the door, and Justine. Both were asleep. On the wall behind each girl hung a lamp controlled by a switch at the end of a cord looped around the bed rail. It could provide various intensities of light. Anna Marie, who was 10 years old but small for her age, had set her lamp low as a nightlight. She feared the dark. Her wheelchair stood beside the bed. From one of the hand grips at the back of the chair hung a quilted insulated jacket. From the other hand grip hung a woolen cap. On winter nights she insisted that these garments be close at hand. The girl slept with the top sheet clenched in her frail hands, as if ready to throw off the bedclothes. Her face was taut with an expression of concerned anticipation, less than anxiety, more than mere disquiet. Although she slept soundly, she appeared to be prepared to flee at the slightest provocation. One day each week, of her own accord, with eyes closed tight, Anna Marie practiced piloting her battery-powered wheelchair to each of 2 elevators. One lay in the east wing, the other in the west. In spite of her limitations and her suffering, she was a happy child. These preparations for flight were out of character. Although she would not talk about it, she seemed to sense that a night of terror was coming, a hostile darkness through which she would need to find her way. She must be prescient. The Bodak, first glimpsed from my high window, had come here, but not alone. 3 of them, silent wolf-like shadows, were gathered around the second bed in which Justine slept. A single Bodak signals impending violence that may be either near and probable, or remote and less certain. If they appear in 2s and 3s, the danger is more immediate. In my experience, when they appear in packs, the pending danger has become imminent peril, and the deaths of many people are days or hours away. Although the sight of 3 of them chilled me, I was grateful that they didn't number 30. Trembling with evident excitement, the Bodaks bent over Justine while she slept, as if studying her intently, as if feeding on her. Chapter 2. The lamp above the second bed had been turned low, but Justine had not adjusted it herself. A nun had selected the dimmest setting, hoping that it might please the girl. Justine did little for herself and asked for nothing. She was partially paralyzed and could not speak. When Justine had been 4 years old, her father had strangled her mother to death. They say that after she had died, he put a rose between her teeth, but with the long, thorny stem down her throat. He drowned little Justine in the bathtub, or thought he did. He left her for dead, but she survived with brain damage from prolonged lack of oxygen. For weeks she lingered in a coma, though that was years ago. These days she slept and woke, but when awake her capacity for engagement with her caregivers fluctuated. Photographs of Justine at 4 reveal a child of exceptional beauty. In those snapshots she looks impish and full of delight. 8 years after the tub, at 12 she was more beautiful than ever. Brain damage had not resulted in facial paralysis or distorted expressions. Curiously, a life spent largely indoors had not left her pale and drawn. Her face had color and not a blemish. Her beauty was chaste, like that of a Botticelli Madonna, and ethereal. For everyone who knew Justine, her beauty stirred neither envy nor desire, but inspired a surprising reverence and inexplicably something like hope. I suspect that the three menacing figures hunched over her with keen interest were not drawn by her beauty. Her enduring innocence attracted them, as did their expectation, their certain knowledge that she would soon be dead by violence and, at last, ugly. These purposeful shadows, as black as scraps of starless night sky, have no eyes, yet I could sense them lingering, no mouths, though I could almost hear the greedy sounds of them feasting on the promise of this girl's death. I once saw them gathered at a nursing home in the hours before an earthquake leveled it, at a service station prior to an explosion and tragic fire, following a teenager named Gary Tolliver in the days before he tortured and murdered his entire family. A single death does not draw them, or two deaths, or even three. They prefer operatic violence, and for them the performance is not over when the fat lady sings, but only when she is torn to pieces. They seem incapable of affecting our world, as though they are not fully present in this place and this time, but are in some way virtual presences. They are travelers, observers, aficionados of our pain. Yet I fear them, and not solely because their presence signals oncoming horror. While they seem unable to affect this world in any significant way, I suspect that I am an exception to the rules that limit them, that I am vulnerable to them, as vulnerable as an ant in the shadow of a descending shoe. Seeming whiter than usual in the company of inky Bodaks, Boo did not growl, but watched these spirits with suspicion and disgust. I pretended to have come here to assure myself that the thermostat had been properly set, to raise the pleated shades and confirm that the window had been firmly closed against all draughts, to dredge some wax from my right ear and to pry a shred of lettuce from between two teeth, though not with the same finger. The Bodaks ignored me, or pretended to ignore me. Sleeping Justine had their complete attention. Their hands or paws hovered a few inches over the girl, and their fingers or talons described circles in the air above her, as if they were novelty act musicians playing an instrument composed of drinking glasses, rubbing eerie music from the wet crystal rims. Perhaps, like an insistent rhythm, her innocence excited them. Perhaps her humble circumstances, her lamb-like grace, her complete vulnerability, were the movements of a symphony to them. I can only theorize about Bodaks. I know nothing for certain about their nature or about their origins. This is true not only of Bodaks. The file-labeled things about which Thomas knows nothing is no less immense than the universe. The only thing I know for sure is how much I do not know. Maybe there's wisdom in that recognition. Unfortunately, I found no comfort in it. Having been bent over Justine, the three Bodaks abruptly stood upright, and as one, turned their wolfish heads toward the door, as if in response to a summoning trumpet that I could not hear. Evidently, Boo could not hear it, either, for his ears did not prick up. His attention remained on the dark spirits. Like shadows chased by sudden light, the Bodaks whirled from the bed, swooped to the door, and vanished into the hallway. Inclined to follow them, I hesitated when I discovered Justine staring at me. Her blue eyes were limpid pools, so clear, seemingly without mystery, yet bottomless. Sometimes you can be sure she sees you. Other times like this, you sense that to her, you are as transparent as glass, that she can look through everything in this world. I said to her, "Don't be afraid," which was twice presumptuous. First, I didn't know that she was frightened or that she was even capable of fear. Second, my words implied a guarantee of protection that in the coming crisis I might not be able to fulfill. Too wise and humble to play the hero, Boo had left the room. As I headed toward the door, Anna Marie in the first bed murmured, "Odd." Her eyes remained closed. Knots of bedsheet were still clutched in her hands. She breathed shallowly, rhythmically. As I paused at the foot of her bed, the girl spoke again, more clearly than before. "Odd." Anna Marie had been born with myelocele spina bifida. Her hips were dislocated, her legs deformed, her head on the pillow seemed almost as large as his shrunken body under the blanket. She appeared to be asleep, but I whispered, "What is it, sweetie?" "Odd one," she said. Her mental retardation was not severe, and did not reveal itself in her voice, which wasn't thick or slurred, but was high and sweet and charming. "Odd one." The chill prickled through me, equal to the sharpest bite of the winter night outside. Something like intuition drew my attention to Justine in the second bed. Her head had turned to follow me. For the first time, her eyes fixed on mine. Justine's mouth moved, but she did not produce even one of the wordless sounds of which, in her deeper retardation, she was capable. While Justine strove unsuccessfully to speak, Anna-Marie spoke again. Odd one. The pleated shades hung slack over the windows. The plush toy kittens on the shelves near Justine's bed sat immobile, without one wink of eye or twitch of whisker. On Anna-Marie's side of the room, the children's books on her shelves were neatly ordered. A china rabbit with flexible furry ears dressed in Edwardian clothes stood sentinel on her nightstand. All was still, yet I sensed an energy barely contained. I would not have been surprised if every inanimate object in the room had come to life, levitating, spinning, ricocheting wall to wall. Stillness reigned, however, and Justine tried to speak again, and Anna-Marie said "loop" in her sweet, piping voice. Leaving the sleeping girl, I moved to the foot of Justine's bed. For fear that my voice would shatter the spell, I did not speak. Wondering if the brain-damaged girl had made room for a visitor, I wished the bottomless blue eyes would polarize into a particular pair of Egyptian black eyes with which I was familiar. Some days I feel as if I have always been 21, but the truth is that I was once young. In those days when death was the thing that happened to other people, my girl, Bronwen Llewellyn, who preferred to be called Stormy, would sometimes say, "Loot me an odd one." She meant that she wanted me to share the events of my day with her, or my thoughts, or my fears and worries. During the 16 months since Stormy had gone to ashes in this world and to service in another, no one had spoken those words to me. Justine moved her mouth without producing sound, and in the adjacent bed, Anna-Marie said in her sleep, "Loop me in." Room 32 seemed airless. Following those 3 words, I stood in a silence as profound as that in a vacuum. I could not breathe. Only a moment ago I had wished these blue eyes would polarize into the black of Stormy's eyes, that the suspicion of a visitation would be confirmed. Now the prospect terrified me. When we hope, we usually hope for the wrong thing. We yearn for tomorrow and the progress that it represents, but yesterday was once tomorrow, and where was the progress in it? Or we yearn for yesterday, for what was or what might have been, but as we are yearning, the present is becoming the past, so the past is nothing but our yearning for second chances. "Loop me in," Anna-Marie repeated. As long as I remain subject to the river of time, which will be as long as I may live, there is no way back to Stormy, to anything. The only way back is forward, downstream. The way up is the way down, and the way back is the way forward. Loop me in, odd one. My hope here in room 32 should not be to speak with Stormy now, but only at the end of my journey, when time had no more power over me, when an eternal present robbed the past of all appeal. Before I might see in those blue vacancies the Egyptian black for which I hoped, I looked away, stared at my hands, which clutched the footboard of the bed. Stormy's spirit does not linger in this world as some do. She moved on as she should have done. The intense, undying love of the living can be a magnet to the dead. Enticing her back would be an unspeakable disservice to her, and although renewed contact might at first relieve my loneliness, ultimately there is only misery in hoping for the wrong thing. I stared at my hands. Anna-Marie fell silent in her sleep. The plush toy kittens and the china rabbit remained inanimate, thus avoiding either a demonic or a Disney moment. In a while, my heart beat at a normal rate once more. Justine's eyes were closed, her lashes glistened, and her cheeks were damp. From the line of her jaw were suspended 2 tears, which quivered and then fell onto the sheet. In search of Boo and Bodox, I left the room.